Hi there again. Guess what book I found in my library? Make Way for Ducklings. And this one even says Christian Svensk in it. How about that? So this is a real classic, huh? This is one of our favorite books of all time. Okay, so we're going to find out what happened about these ducklings. Quite a story, and it's a true story. And when you're a little older, you can go to Boston and visit the park where there are statues of these ducklings. Okay, so here's the story. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live, but every time Mr. Mallard saw what he thought looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. Oh, the very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard. So down they flapped. See? And that island still exists. Next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Oh, dear. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts in the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first, for sure. Look at that. See, these are the swan boats. They call the swan boats. They're not live swans. But of course, Mr. and Mrs. Mallard don't know that. Uh-oh. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But look out, squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. You'll get run over. And when she got her breath, she added, this is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we'll have to look somewhere else. Oh, dear. Just when they thought they might be settled. Oh. So they flew over Beacon Hill and around the State House, but there was no place there. Boy, they're high up in the air, aren't they? They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Shh, those are my dogs. They get very anxious when other dogs bark. Then they flew over to the Charles River. This is better, quacked Mrs. Mallard. That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden. Yes, said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings. There they are. They might have found another place. So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. But of course they could swim. And one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that the Mallards called on Michael every day. There's Michael. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water or to have her lunch or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. There she is counting. One day, the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then Cack, then Lack, then Knack, then Knack, then Whack, then Pack, then Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility, taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. You can imagine. 8 babies. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. I'll meet you in a week in the public garden, he quacked over his shoulder. Take good care of the ducklings. Oh, don't you worry, said Mrs. Mallard. I know all about bringing up children. And she did. And she taught them how to swim and dive. See, there's one looking up at the bee. And she taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. She's a good mom, huh? Teaching them all those things. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Knack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line, just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they go, off they go. There they waddled ashore and waddled along until they came to the highway. Uh-oh, a highway. Oh, no. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk, went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack, went Mrs. Mallard, and she tumbled back again. Quack, 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 went Jack, Cat, Lack, Knack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on, quack, 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 quacking. See, there they are. They're trying to cross the road. Nobody's stopping. Very inconsiderate of those drivers. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. What do you think he's going to do? I bet he's going to stop the traffic, get them to cross. There he goes. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. And there she goes, and her little ducklings following her. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. See, there they are. They're going down Mount Vernon. They've got quite a ways to go. He called Clancy at the headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send the police car, quick." Because he knows they've got a couple more streets to cross. How are they going to do that if he's not there to help them? Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Oh, isn't that amazing?" And the man who swept the streets said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. How about that? Oh, there they go. Look at that. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from the headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could march across the street. There they go. And this is a very big street. Right into the public gardens. There they go, huh? There they go. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All of them. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. See? There you go. They're saying quack, 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 quack. Thank you. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. See him? There he is, he's waiting. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they followed the swan boats and ate peanuts. And when night falls, they swim onto their little island and go to sleep. And that is a true story. One day you'll go to Boston and see just where those ducklings had to cross the street. And you'll be in the park and visit their relatives who still live on that island. Bye for now. See you at the next book.